Hello, everyone, and welcome to Teachly University. And in this lecture today, we're going to be discussing the art and science of flow, how to optimize the way we learn, perform, and live. And the topic of flow is really something I'm very passionate about. And really, it's a fascinating field because we're seeing so much research in the science of flow just in the past, say, 10 to 15 years. And it's exciting because I'm fascinated with human potential and how we can really move beyond the baseline and really reach our true potential in almost every aspect of our lives and how we can become something more and really remove many of these limiting beliefs and mental limitations that we've created on ourselves that prevent us from really living our true potential. And I think so many people struggle with that today, and it's something I've had to battle for a long time. And I believe that flow is one of the best ways to be able to overcome some of this internal resistance and challenges that we have and become something more and achieve more in many aspects of our lives. So I want to start with a quote from Rainier Rilke, who said, "May what I do flow from me like a river, no forcing and no holding back, the way it is with children." And this is a wonderful quote because we can learn a lot from children. I think when you look at children and how they behave, they really have just such a vivid imagination. There's no holding back with them. They're willing to play and act down different ideas, and there's no limitations. They believe that anything is possible. And I think with flow, when we enter these states, we really believe that anything is possible, and we feel almost this aura of invincibility when we're in this state. And part of the reason we feel this way is because, again, we shut off the analytical mind and we turn off the intellect and stop trying to control everything in our environment and instead act out on our ideas and really release the authentic self that we have, which when we become who we really are, that's when we enter these flow states much more often. So what is flow then? And the term itself, we hear it very often in the circles of personal psychology or positive psychology. We hear this in studies on creativity, and the field of creativity itself has become increasingly popular within the past 10 years or so. And we hear the term flow quite often. So what is flow? To answer that question, we want to look at high performance athletes. And Stephen Kotler, who's a journalist and researcher, he wrote a book called The Rise of Superman. And he's also created the Flow Research Collective, which researches flow and these mental states of optimal performance. And in his research, he interviewed a number of high performance athletes like surfers, skateboarders, and skydivers, athletes that are really taking on a tremendous amount of risk where they can risk serious injury or even death. And in his interviews, what he discovered is that many of these athletes experience these states of flow where they're totally immersed in what it is that they're doing. They lose their sense of self, their sense of time, and they're just totally focused on what they're doing. They no longer experience fear. They're just in the zone. They feel invincible or godlike. And I think many of us have experienced these states to some degree when, for example, maybe at work, we're working on a spreadsheet and we're so focused on it, we forget where we are, our sense of time and space. We're just in the zone and totally immersed in what we're doing. And these athletes oftentimes experience these states of flow. And what drives them to continue taking on these risks and continue pursuing their passion and their sport is so that they can enter these states more often. It's not necessarily the outcome, but it's the process and really just getting to feel this sense of invincibility that you get to experience when you are in this state of flow. And I think it's very fascinating, really, how these athletes enter these states. And we're going to start discussing the biological aspects of flow and what are the biological processes that the brain experiences in flow. But I think also the metaphysical, because there's something to this when it comes to flow, that when we enter these states more often, do our thoughts and our behaviors when we're in this state impact what goes on outside of us? And the energy that we create in flow, does that impact how we can control our circumstances? The energy that's outside of us. Do we tap into something larger than ourselves when we're in this state? And we're going to kind of explore that in this lecture. And the issue that I think, however, that again, I love this image. The issue that many of us experience and why we struggle with flow and getting into these states and why we haven't reached our true potential is that our brains are rattling at a million miles an hour. We are stressed out to the max. Mental illness has become a huge problem in this country. So many of us are struggling with depression and anxiety, and it's just become a big problem. We're distracted, we're at jobs that we don't like, hence why we're seeing the great resignation where so many people are leaving their jobs because they're looking for something better. They want meaning and purpose in their lives, and they want to be able to do something where I believe that the end game is to so they can get into these states more often, to get into a state of flow. But again, the problem is we're just so distracted, so stressed out. We don't put ourselves in these positions where we can get into state more often. So to quote then Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and it took me a while to master pronouncing his last name. My apologies to Mihaly. And this is a quote from his book, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And Mihaly is one of the seminal pioneers and researchers behind flow. He's been doing research on this topic going back to the 1970s and really doing research on this mental state of flow. And to quote him again from his book, he says that the best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times, although such experiences can also be enjoyable if we have worked hard to attain them. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limit in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. Optimal experience is thus something that we can make happen. For a child, it could be placing with trembling fingers the last block on the tower she has built, higher than any she has built so far. For a swimmer, it could be trying to beat his own record. For a violinist, mastering an intricate musical passage. For each person, there are thousands of opportunities, challenges to expand ourselves. So what Mihaly is suggesting here is that the best moments of our lives aren't when we are at the beach getting a suntan, or chilling and watching or binge watching Netflix, or going out with some friends for drinks. And those things are fine. I'm not opposed to them, obviously. But the best moments of our lives, at least according to Mihaly, are when we're resting, but when we are voluntarily or when we are deliberately pursuing something worthwhile. And in this pursuit is where we enter these states of flow, where we totally immerse ourselves and expand ourselves and become something more. Thus, when we enter these states of flow, we have the opportunity to transform ourselves and grow and be better. And it's this transformation at the end, this feeling of transformation that all of us really yearn for, and why we have goals and why we make the decisions that we make every single day. Because at the end of the day, we're chasing a feeling, the feeling of accomplishment, the feeling of being something more. And many of us struggle with trying to get there. But it's the pursuit, it's the passions that we have, and going after them and getting into these states and taking on challenges that give us a chance to expand ourselves is where the good stuff is in our lives, and how really our best moments are defined by the work we put into towards our passions. And I think that's certainly true. I think it's not so much happiness, it's meaning that all of us are yearning for, and the chance to expand ourselves and release the authentic self. And I think Abraham Maslow would agree with me on that, and would agree with Mihaly. And this is, again, I use Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I use this hierarchy in many of my lectures. And again, for those of you who don't know who Abraham Maslow is, a famous 20th century psychologist who crafted this hierarchy of needs, which he believes that this hierarchy is really the foundation for how to live your best life and how to live the most fulfilling and rewarding life possible. And when you look at this hierarchy, we have, again, at the bottom of this pyramid, there are basic necessities and needs. Obviously, food, water, warmth, rest, security and safety, and shelter, and so on and so forth. So, the foundation of the hierarchy is your basic needs. And for the most part, many of us can satisfy these basic needs. The problem is we focus so much on survival and satisfying these basic needs, we neglect these other higher level needs that are the psychological needs, such as belongingness and love and intimate relationships and meaning and the feeling of accomplishment. Those are very important. But when you look at the top of this pyramid, self-actualization, it's achieving one's full potential, including creative activities. This is where flow really resides. When we're in flow, this is when we're reaching our full potential because we're no longer doubting ourselves, we're no longer analytical or questioning our beliefs and our ideas. We overcome the self and become something more and act out on our ideas. And when we remove that internal resistance, the mind and body are one. And that's where self actualization is. And, this is the pinnacle of human experience and why it's the top of that pyramid and why sometimes it can be challenging for many of us to get into this state. But in this lecture, we're going to discuss how it is we can position ourselves to achieve this state more often. So then that leads to my question. How do we get into flow? How do we get into this state more often? So in answering that question, I want to stress that it's not something that you can force. You can't force your way into flow. If you do, then chances are it's just going to be very difficult for you to enter that state. It's going to be self-defeating. You're going to get frustrated. You can't force flow into your life, but you can position yourself in such a way. You can make new choices consciously to put yourself in these states more often. So to borrow from Mihaly's book, this is a flow channel chart that comes from his book here. We can see in this chart there two extremes. We have one extreme of boredom, and with boredom, it's the monotonous routine of everyday life. We wake up in the morning, we brush our teeth, take a shower, drink coffee from the same mug. We take the same route to work, talk to the same people, experience the same emotions at work, and chances are many of us don't even like what we do. And then we repeat the same routine going home, we take the same route back, and we just do the same thing over and over and over again. And the brain craves novelty, and what creates boredom is when we do the same things over and over again without introducing novelty or challenges that help us expand. And that's where that flow channel resides, where we're doing something that isn't too difficult, but it's challenging enough to help us expand and grow. But on the other side of that channel, we have anxiety. And look, let's face it, so many of us struggle with depression and anxiety. We're stressed out. And stress and anxiety is where we're essentially worrying about the worst case scenario. We're in a state of fight or flight where we're constantly in a state of survival. And if you, going back to Maslow's hierarchy, if we're in a constant state of survival and trying to satisfy just these raw physical needs, then it becomes very difficult then to pursue the higher level needs that we need to really bring forth into our lives if we want to really make the most out of our lives every single day. So it's trying to find that balance and that sweet spot where we're taking on challenges that aren't too difficult, but are challenging enough to where they help us expand and grow. And we have these opportunities every single day where we begin to really reshift our focus. And again, thanks to the power of neuroplasticity, we now know that the brain can change even at an advanced age. And it all starts with making new choices and decisions that help us get into flow states more often, that give us a chance to expand and to transform in a positive way. So with this here, this is a diagram that I'm borrowing from Bob Proctor. And for those of you who don't know who Bob Proctor is, if you've seen The Secret, Bob Proctor's in The Secret. He's also a famous success coach, and he's been around for decades. You can watch a lot of his videos on YouTube. Sadly, as of the making of this lecture, he passed away, I believe, several months ago. But just an amazing man, and really just has really transformed my life in a lot of ways. And really, I think he's just was a wonderful person. I recommend watching a lot of his videos on YouTube. Just fantastic stuff. And he uses this diagram very often, which we're going to kind of dive into a little bit here. So you could see here that the mind is broken up into two parts where we have the conscious and subconscious mind. And it's important to understand that the brain itself, there's various parts of the brain that are operating and firing and wiring as we use the brain and make decisions throughout the day. Okay, so I want to make that very clear. But when it comes to our thoughts and feelings and actions and really how we learn and how we use our senses to navigate through our external environment, it's important that we understand the difference between the conscious and subconscious mind. So the conscious mind is the thinking mind. And this is where in the conscious mind we accept or reject ideas. This is where we set goals. Our will and short-term memory and perception comes into play. And when we develop a lot of these perceptions, by using the five senses that we use to navigate our external environment. And the information that we develop consciously through our senses and through repetition and emotion is passed on to the subconscious mind. How we learn and how feelings are created, how ideas are created, is through repetition and emotion. And what do I mean by that? So, a very good example when it comes to repetition, when we first learned how to drive, when we first learned we were in driving school, we were all over the place. We were nervous. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know how to change lanes and all the traffic laws and driving laws and all that stuff. We didn't really, it was obviously challenging for us in the beginning. But through repetition over time, now when we drive, we don't even think twice about it, because through repetition, it was impressed subconsciously how we're able to drive, and we learn all the rules subconsciously when we don't even think about it anymore. So that is how a lot of our behaviors and habits are created, is through repetition, through thoughts and actions that over time done repetitively become part of our personality. Also through emotion. So let's say a very good example. Let's say one day you were flying and you had a very bad experience. There was a lot of turbulence. You got maybe a little nauseous. You were very uncomfortable. And from that one moment, the emotional intensity behind that moment when you were flying and had that bad experience was cemented subconsciously. So whenever you think about that moment or you think about flying again, maybe your heart starts to race a little bit, you get nervous, your palms become sweaty. And the reason why is because even though that event already occurred or you're not in an airplane, the subconscious doesn't know the difference between what's real or not. Just thinking about that moment or thinking about going on an airplane brings about that feeling of discomfort and anxiety because of that emotional event. So how we learn is through repetition and emotion. So going and discussing now to the subconscious mind, that is then the emotional mind. Again, going back to that bad experience we had on that airplane, okay? We get emotional about it when we think about it because of the emotional intensity behind that event. And that is how our long-term memories are shaped. We remember things and subconsciously remember. Our brain is like a memory bank. It digests and stores all of the experiences we've had in our lives, that especially how we've used and interacted in our environment using our five senses. So the subconscious works in feelings, and it must accept all information impressed upon it through repetition and emotion. Again, the subconscious does not know the difference between what's real or not. And also remember too, and this is the most important, that many of our behaviors are totally unconscious. We don't even realize we do them. And it's funny because when you ask a child, for example, why, if they did something bad and you ask them why they did it, they're like, oh, I don't know. I have no idea. Adults do the same thing. You do something and then you ask yourself, well, why did I even do that in the first place? And that's because of the subconscious. We have habits that are ingrained subconsciously. Some of these habits good and some of these habits are not so good. And that's what makes it challenging to replace bad habits and encourage and replace some more positive habits. It takes work and deliberate effort, but I believe that flow helps get us there when it comes to changing our habits to more constructive ones. So then finally, the subconscious controls the vibration of the body. And what that really means is that we don't create energy, we are energy. And the energy that we give off, or what we focus on and how we use the energy that we generate and that we become, can impact the way we think, the way we behave, and can also impact our external environment as well. And that also impacts then our actions. Doing becomes part of our personality. Again, habits. What makes it a habit is that the way we think and act on a consistent basis creates part of our personality. And the vibration of the body is decided by thoughts held in the subconscious. So again, and to put this another way with vibration, and then maybe we're getting into the metaphysical here a little bit, and we're going to go dance back and forth between the biological and metaphysical. Say you're at an event or you're at a party and there's somebody that comes in, and maybe this has all happened. When there's somebody that enters the room, they give off this vibe. And it's just there's something about that person that you don't understand. They just give off this positive vibe or maybe a negative vibe. Whatever that is, that's vibration, in that person emits a certain amount of energy, or positive or negative energy. And that's all based on how they behave and think. And that resonates with other people around that person. And that resonates around their environment. So it's something to think about, that we give off a vibe, and how we think and how we behave and act, again, can rub off on other people and can also impact our environment and circumstances in a certain way. And then finally, with the actions of the body, it controls the action and behavior part of our personality. We act out on our subconscious habits and ideas. Okay, and that's how we learn. We get to a point through repetition and through emotion that we don't think as much anymore. We act out on our habits and ideas. Some of these habits are good, some of them are not so good. So then we define our lives using the intellect by what we can see, while we ignore our higher faculties that shape a vision that isn't visible to the naked eye. So what happens is, and what makes it very challenging to get into flow, is that we rely too much on the intellect. Obviously, the analytical mind and the intellect are important because we use the analytical mind to set goals, to use our imagination, and to make decisions and make choices that are constructive or are negative and are bad for us. So the analytical mind is important. But what happens is, when it comes to setting goals, once we decide we want to do something, the intellect can hinder us from acting out our internal vision of a desirable future, because we try to think about how that's going to happen, and we try to think about every step along the way, or we try to force or predict when it's going to happen. And life isn't as linear as we would like for it to be. When we really begin to act out on our vision, there's nothing in our external environment that can validate that it's possible. So that's where faith comes in. That's where the metaphysical side comes in. It's believing something that you can't see. And that these many high-level athletes and people that get into flow, they visualize the experience that they want to have, or the performance they want to have, before it actually happens. There's nothing necessarily in their external environment that can validate it's possible. It's totally within their center of consciousness, where they control this vision and they act out on it without overly thinking about it. They just do it. They act out on this vision through visualization and imagining what it is that they would like to achieve. So again, to add on to this, I'm going to quote Albert Einstein, who said, "The intellect has little to do on the road to discovery. There comes a leap in consciousness, call it intuition or what you will. The solution comes to you, you don't even know how or why." And when in creating the theory of relativity, Einstein credits not so much mathematics or data, but intuition and visualization to develop the theory of relativity. And in fact, it was only after the fact that mathematics validated Einstein's theory. So he credits more intuition than necessarily linear conscious thinking. Okay, it's a leap of faith, essentially, and relying on your gut instinct in that deeper version of yourself. It's not getting overly analytical or too intellectual about this. And this is the problem, I think, with in the realms of positive psychology and personal growth and transformation. We tend to over intellectualize this stuff. We shouldn't. It's not as difficult or complicated as it should be. Okay, it's actually a lot easier, or it's pretty simple, I believe. And again, I know I'm kind of getting on a word salad here, but it's a lot more simple than you realize to get into these states of flow and to really unleash this higher version of ourselves and remove these mental blocks that hold us back. So flow then is a state where we move beyond our senses, body, and analytical mind, and take action on our ideas without internal resistance, thus expanding ourselves through creative expression and authenticity. When we're in flow, we move beyond our senses. We move beyond the body, the mind, our personality, our past, or our future. We are totally immersed in the present moment. We no longer experience this internal resistance of doubt and fear. We move past that. Our mind and body are one, and we're just in this state of bliss, and where everything is firing on all cylinders, and when we're authentically expressing ourselves. And that is really the essence of flow, that we are one, our mind and body are one, our thoughts and beliefs are aligned, and we act out on those beliefs and ideas, and no longer are we experiencing this internal resistance and this mental stress that so many of us experience. And that's where the magic happens, I believe, when we enter the state of flow. And to quote Joe Dispenza, who has really become a very prominent researcher in this field and in psychology and quantum physics and all that. When our behaviors match our intentions, when our actions are equal to our thoughts, when our minds and our bodies are working together, when our words and our deeds are aligned, there is an immense power behind any individual. So, what Dispenza is talking about here, when we have an idea, let's say, for example, that we believe that we can be wealthy, and subconsciously our beliefs match that intention, and we begin to act out on our beliefs and that intention with such an emotional intensity that goes beyond anything that's occurring in our external environment. There's tremendous amount of power in that because no longer do we have self-doubt. We are, again, the mind and body, our beliefs, our intentions, and our actions match the thoughts within our minds. And we begin moving forward towards that goal and whatever it is we want to achieve. That's extremely powerful. And once you achieve that, and once you can really begin to bridge that gap and remove these limitations and have your intentions match your beliefs and you act out on them, that's where flow really happens. And that's where there's a tremendous amount of power there that if you can harness that on a more consistent basis, that's where a lot of good stuff can really happen. And that's where I believe we become the creators of our lives. That's where we really begin to start taking control of what it is that we want to achieve. And we become the authors of our destiny. And when we enter these states more often, when we're in flow much more frequently, that's where I believe there's the biological part and then there's also the metaphysical, both of which we're going to explore. When we enter these states, something happens where, for whatever reason, somehow these chance occurrences that happen, synchronicities, opportunities that we didn't recognize before, that we didn't observe them before. All of a sudden they came out of nowhere. And that's happened to us where we have days where, for whatever reason, everything's just working. Is that sheer luck? Or does it just so happen that the mental state that we're in is producing that result? And then there's the biological aspect where when we enter these states biologically, our brains are functioning at its highest and best level, at its optimal performance level. Okay, and I don't want to sound too mechanical there, but when we enter these states, the brain is functioning on all cylinders. And we're going to kind of get into the biological aspect first and then the metaphysical. So when it comes to flow, there's the big 5 flow chemicals that are associated with flow and that really occur, these neurochemical processes that occur when we're in flow. So one of them is dopamine. It's a feel-good or rewarded chemical. It increases attention, clarity, and learning. So dopamine is not just a chemical that helps us feel good, but it's a chemical that helps us motivate us and want to learn more and motivate us to keep moving forward in pursuit of a particular project or goal. So when we feel good, when we're thinking positive, when we're in a good mood, that's where good things really begin to happen. And that motivates us to not only want to work more and pursue our goal, but we'll become much more receptive to new ideas. So then there's norepinephrine, which increases the heart rate and keeps us focused on the goal. It releases glucose into the body for more energy, and it's essentially a performance enhancer. Again, with a lot of these high-level athletes, when they're in flow, their heart rate goes up, they have much more energy, they feel like they're just invincible, and they can just keep going and going and going, and it enhances performance. And also, another chemical is endorphins. And again, with a lot of these athletes, when they're in this state, they don't feel any pain. They don't even realize they're hurt till after the fact because they feel so good because of all these feel-good chemicals that are being released into the body that they just keep going because they're into this state of flow. And all these chemicals like endorphins and dopamine are released. And then there's anandamide, which elevates mood, reduces pain, and aids in making connections with unrelated ideas. So there's a concept called, and I've talked this in my other lectures, called combinatory play, where subconsciously we're making connections with unrelated ideas. And what happens, and I don't know if many of you have had this, and I've had this, where we have these aha moments where we're in the shower, we're walking, or we're just doing something unrelated to work or something unrelated to a project we're working on, and then all of a sudden we have this idea to solve a problem related to that project or job that we have. And how that occurs is that we make these subconscious connections with the images and sounds and things that we've seen in our external environment that we use our senses to process. We make these connections with unrelated ideas that comes up with a novel idea or solution or thought that occurs out of nowhere. And that's kind of the mystery behind the conscious and subconscious mind and where ideas come from, is that we make these connections. And more importantly, it reduces fear. And again, reverting back to these athletes, a lot of them experience that once they're in these states, flow seems to fade away. Our limiting beliefs and doubt fade away, and we're just in the zone. And then finally, there's serotonin. It induces feelings of calm after the flow experience. So it's, you say this is a runner's high, that after we go for a great run, we feel great. We have all this energy. We feel like we're also at peace. We just feel amazing. And this happens after many of these flow experiences where we just feel a sense of calm and peace, and we're just totally immersed in our environment, and we're just totally at ease with ourselves, and we're at peace. And that's, again, it's easy to see why it is that when we enter these states of flow, we just feel absolutely amazing, and why it could be addicting to want to get into these states more often, and why these athletes continue to do what they do, because they want to experience flow. So then it quotes Stephen Kotler. This is from his book, The Rise of Superman. Since flow is a fluid action state, making better decisions isn't enough. We also have to act on those decisions. The problem is fear, which stands between us and all actions. Yet our fears are grounded in self, time, and space. With our sense of self out of the way, we are liberated from doubt and insecurity. With time gone, there is no yesterday to regret or tomorrow to worry about. And when our sense of space disappears, so do physical consequences. But when all three vanish at once, something far more incredible occurs: our fear of death. That most fundamental of all fears can no longer exist. Simply put, if you're infinite and intemporal, you cannot die. He further adds, mindset impacts emotion, which alters biology, which increases performance. Thus, it's seen by tinkering with mindset, using everything from physical to psychological to pharmacological interventions. One could significantly enhance performance. So flow is a state where once we learn how to face our fears and overcome them and take action in spite of our fear, we experience something that's called the terror barrier. And this is something that Bob Proctor talks a lot about. The terror barrier, when we try something novel and new, something that's challenging, we face this fear, which is natural. But once we take that action and we move forward anyway, along the way, fear begins to reside. It fades away, and we begin to lose our sense of self, and we become liberated from doubt and insecurity. We liberate ourselves from being overly analytical, and space and time seems to disappear, and we become pure consciousness. And when we become pure consciousness, we become infinite in many ways, where we feel invincible and we can do anything. And isn't that a feeling that we really want to achieve on a more consistent basis, is entering these states of flow? And that is why it becomes addicting. And that's why it's such a powerful state to be in if we want to achieve whatever it is that we want to achieve. And Tony Robbins talks a lot about this too, that if we want to achieve something, we got to get into a certain state. If a lot of, again, and I always go back to sports, a lot of athletes, they listen to music, they have certain routines they have before they perform to enter a state to perform. If, for example, you're going to make a pitch, or you're going to do a public speaking event, the best speakers get into a certain state before they go out there and perform and speak. So it's about the mindset that you have. And that mindset that we have can impact our biology. And when it impacts our biology, it can enhance performance. So it's the choices that we make, the conscious choices that we make on a daily basis, that can impact the subconscious, thus uniting both the conscious and subconscious mind, and we become one. And mind and body becomes one. So now we're going to discuss a little bit about the metaphysical. And this is, again, quoting Joe Dispenza from his book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, which is an amazing book. He says that the quantum field doesn't respond simply to our wishes, our emotional requests. It doesn't just respond to our aims or thoughts. It only responds when those two are aligned and or coherent. Again, when we talk about flow, the mind and body are one. So that is when they are broadcasting the same signal. When we combine an elevated emotion with an open heart and a conscious intention, again, that we deliberately choose what actions to take that can put us in states of flow. With clear thought, we signal the field to respond in amazing ways. The quantum field responds not to what we want, it responds to who we are being. So when Dispenza refers to the quantum field, and again, Dispenza discusses a lot about quantum physics and quantum mechanics. We're not really going to dive too much into that here. The point is, when he refers to the quantum field, he refers to the universal mind, God, or intelligence, and really more specifically, he refers to an energy that's external and outside of us, an energy that is intelligent, that is responsible for everything that has been created in our external environment and in our world. And when you look at everything in our external environment, everything is made of energy. And when you consider our thoughts and our body are comprised of energy, our thoughts can impact what goes on out there. So what we observe, essentially, and what Dispenza is talking about, what we observe into our lives and what we consciously intend to want to occur and observe, it can occur in our lives through synchronicity and through amazing ways we didn't even think were possible, because these are possibilities in this, again, I don't want to sound redundant, in this field of possibility where there's a specific thought and idea you have for wealth, for a relationship, for health, whatever that is. It's a possibility that's out there in this quantum field, in this energy field that exists outside of us. And when we observe this intelligence, according to Dispenza, and we don't become overly intellectual about it, that's when these amazing things begin to happen. And I believe we become much more receptive metaphysically to this quantum field, or to this energy, to this universal intelligence. There's a lot of words to describe it. We become much more receptive to this field and merge with it when we're in these states of flow. Because flow and this quantum field are one and the same. There's no internal resistance. We reach our highest potential. And this quantum field and this energy, and we also describe it as God, whatever other name you want to call it, it represents highest potential. And when we enter these states of flow, that's where really, when we mend together with this energy, that's when somehow these just amazing occurrences happen. And when this has happened to us, whether we realize it or not, where there's just some days where just everything seems to be working and we don't know why. And perhaps we don't realize it, but we are in these states where we seem to somehow interact with this energy field that Dispenza talks about. So again, remember, there's the biological and there's a metaphysical. And even if you don't subscribe to the metaphysical, you can see that the tremendous biological benefits of getting into these states much more often. So in getting into flow, there's a number of ways we can go about doing this, the choices that we make every single day. Of course, meditation is one of the most powerful ways to be able to get into states of flow. Okay, meditation, again, the research is clear that meditation is one of the most powerful ways to get into flow, because again, we shut off the analytical mind, we focus on our breathing, and through meditation, we lose our sense of self. We no longer define ourselves by our environment that reminds us of who we are. We use meditation as a way to overcome our limitations and visualize a better future and become something more. And again, meditation is just that powerful. And I'm going to have a separate lecture in the future focusing specifically on meditation. Exercise, playing games and sports are an extremely powerful way to get into flow. Exercise, again, when we exercise, we're focused on an objective, which is to work out. And when we exercise, we practice getting into these states because of all the benefits, the mental and physical benefits of exercising, whether it's weightlifting, running, so on and so forth. Taking risks. The biggest way of getting into flow, if you want to get to the heart of it, is taking risks. Now, I'm not saying being reckless, or being stupid. That's not what we want to do, but we want to start taking risks. For example, if we see an attractive stranger, perhaps we want to get in the habit of talking to an attractive stranger. We want to do, if we're afraid of public speaking, we want to do more public speaking engagements. We want to do things that scare us and that challenge us. So that's what I'm talking about with taking risks. Practicing self-awareness. And there's a psychological term called metacognition. It's about thinking how we're thinking. Observe yourself and your surroundings and the results or lack of results that you're getting. And think consciously about ways that you can begin to enter these states, or think about how you would want to be, the kind of person you want to be, or the kind of results you want to get in your life. And by doing that in of itself, that's how we really begin to make changes that can change the brain for the better. Free writing is a great exercise, and this is something I actually create a course on this called power writing, where through power writing, you essentially set a timer and you just write as fast as you can within that time without stopping. And what that does is that, again, it's just another primer to get you in the habit of getting into flow, where you just stop being so analytical and over intellectualize everything. When you let go and just act out on your ideas and treat life as a game in a way through writing, where you, at least for a period of time, shut off the analytical mind, again, it prepares you mentally to get into flow more often. Having specific goals. To get into flow, we want to pursue goals that are meaningful. So write down the goals that you want to achieve. Write them down and be specific about them in detail. Be of good cheer. Again, so many studies that show that being positive, or getting in the habit of really focusing on being in better moods by doing or engaging in habits that make you feel better and to bring about positivity in your life, you become much more receptive to flow and receptive to ideas that, again, the biological aspect, and then there's also the metaphysical benefits, where when you're much more positive and you're in a good mood, somehow you get these ideas for things that you didn't even think about before. You become much more receptive to receiving ideas from the ether, or from the quantum field, the universal intelligence, or God. Or if we just want to focus on the biological aspect, when you're in a much more happier mood, when you reduce your stress levels, that pays off tremendously for your overall health. And then learning. Learning is a powerful way to get into flow, because how we bring about change in our lives and how we change the brain and improve is by learning, is through learning. And I'm going to raise this question then, in terms of getting into flow and learning, is, does it then take 10,000 hours to learn something? Now, the 10,000 hour rule was crafted by Malcolm Gladwell, who in his book Outliers, and Malcolm Gladwell has written a number of books on psychology and performance, where he discusses how that in order to master something, or whether it's to master chess or the violin, or to master even just being good at using an Excel spreadsheet, it requires 10,000 hours to master a particular skill. And there is some truth to that, I think. It does take a certain level of time to master a particular skill. But there's a lot of holes, I think. There's some holes in his theory, and I think Stephen Kotler would agree with me on that, where he says that flow becomes an alternative path to mastery. Sans the misery. Forget 10,000 hours of delayed gratification. Flow junkies turn instant gratification into their North Star, putting in far more hours of practice time by gleefully harnessing their hedonic impulse. So what Kotler discusses here, or what he's hinting at, is it really the 10,000 hours that leads to mastery, or is it the state of consciousness or the state of flow that many of these people get into that leads them to mastery? So, which leads then to the other theory, that perhaps it's not so much the hours we put into something that leads to mastery, but it is the state of consciousness that we get into that can determine that. Or more specifically, how often we get into flow that helps us learn faster and master something in a much shorter amount of time. So it's not about being miserable or delaying gratification. It is to simply take action for the sake of it, so that we can get into flow and experience what, again, Abraham Maslow and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and Stephen Kotler discuss as being the optimal state or form of human experience.